Today we are looking at a case from the first half of the 20th century, so sit back as we go to Belgium. Marie Alexandrine Becker, originally named Marie Petitjean, was born on the 14th of July 1879 in the rural village of Wassemont, in Landen in Belgium. Her early years were marked by the harsh realities of poverty, with her family toiling in the fields just to make a living. And like many other children at the time, she did not have much of an education. Instead, she was expected to work, missing out on the opportunities of formal schooling. Despite this, Marie had an unwavering determination to educate herself. She asked the village priest if he would teach her reading, writing and arithmetic, and it was soon noticed that she was quite a bright young girl. However, at the age of 16, she made a life-altering decision to move away from her family and live with her aunt, who owned a rope shop in Saint-Folline Street in the city of Liège. At the latter part of the 19th century, Liège was a thriving industrial hub, fueled by its steel and coal industries. Its streets were filled with beautiful buildings, standing as a testament to Belgium's industrial prowess and rich heritage. Marie seemed to be very happy in Liège. It was a departure from the arduous rural life she had known, an escape into the promise of an urban existence that she had always dreamed of. There was much activity in her aunt's shop. It was a busy place where Pekit, the traditional Belgian spirit, also known as Belgian gin, was always on offer. This hospitable gesture became very important to the business, as customers were regularly welcome to share a glass. Marie would watch her aunt engage in conversation with each customer, which taught her invaluable skills as she observed and absorbed the lively interactions. Marie's life significantly changed on the 15th of August 1896 during the Marianne feasts in the Outre-Mercer district. She was now 17 years old, and amongst the festivities, she met a man named Jan, who soon after she married. Life was good for the couple, and in the year 1900, when Marie turned 21, she moved from the employment of her aunts and found work in a sewing shop. Her dedication and talent were quickly recognised, and she excelled in all her tasks. She started to make new friends and was described by those who knew her as both pretty and vivacious. She possessed a natural cheerfulness which endeared her to others, especially men, who, not realising that she was married, would often ask if they could court her. Unfortunately, her marriage to Jan did not last, and the couple separated. By now, Marie had ascended the social ladder, no longer a seamstress. Instead, she was overseeing fittings at a prestigious fashion emporium on Pot d'Or Street in Liège. With her newfound prosperity, she had managed to secure her own residence and began frequenting affluent areas to offer her expertise in fashion. In 1905, at the Universal Exhibition, Marie met Mr. Charles Becker, a wealthy gentleman who was considerably older than her and owned a sawmill and a furniture shop. She married Mr. Becker in 1906 and moved into his home, which was adjacent to his sawmill. His two sons, Charles Jr. and Gustave, also worked there. However, Marie's integration into the Becker family was not easy, and she often argued with Gustave's wife, a young lady named Leontine. In fact, they argued so much that eventually Mr. Becker had to intervene and tell his daughter-in-law that if she didn't make peace with his wife, he would dismiss her from her position in the business. This tension highlighted Marie's challenge in manoeuvring through the complex network of familial relationships within the household. Over the next few years, Marie continued to work, although it was rumoured that she engaged in liaisons with many different gentlemen. In 1912, Mr. Charles Becker died, and this meant that his son Charles Jr. took charge of the family business. Marie seemed saddened by the passing of her husband, and in order to try and occupy her mind, she started a sewing workshop in one of the rooms in the house. This proved to be a success and attracted many customers. Her designs were greatly influenced by the works of Paul Poiret, and she skillfully reproduced his garments into her own distinctive creations. In 1914, World War I began, and it was rumoured that Marie worked as a spy for the German army. Although the sawmill was badly damaged in the fighting, its resilience prevailed, and in the years that followed it continued to thrive. Following the war, Marie's sewing workshop became so successful that by 1920, she was able to fulfill her ambition and open a fashion store on the charming Saint Leonard Street in Liège. She employed 4 workers, and the business initially did very well. However, in 1928, her life took an unexpected turn when she met Maximilian Hardy, a man 20 years her junior. Despite their differences in age, they became passionately devoted to each other. The following year, things took a turn for the worse during the stock market crash of 1929. The economic downturn meant that Marie's business started to suffer, and later she was declared bankrupt. Although distraught at losing her store, she found comfort in the arms of a man named Lambert Becker. He was someone who projected an image of virtue and propriety, but was known locally for his promiscuous behaviour with women. Marie harboured a secret dissatisfaction with life, so when Mr. Lambert Becker propositioned her, she readily succumbed to his advances. The affair with Mr. Becker made her feel that she had been suppressed beneath the veneer of a mundane life, and now she decided she wanted to experience something more exciting. In the autumn of 1932, Maximilian Hardy unexpectedly died. His death was officially attributed to indigestion. Following his passing, Marie received an insurance payout that she used to establish another clothing boutique. Encouraged by a friend's advice, she expanded her services to mainly cater to an affluent clientele. This led her into the company of rich women, where she gained access to elite social circles. She now began a lifestyle of extravagant spending that she was able to sustain by discreetly borrowing money from her new wealthy acquaintances. On the 23rd of March 1933, a lady named Mrs. Dopania Castadol, an apparent close friend of Marie, died after consuming tea that Marie had prepared. Initially, Marie, someone who was known for her compassion, had offered to look after the lady, but regrettably, her condition deteriorated under Marie's care, culminating in her untimely demise. Compounding the sorrow of Mrs. Dopania Castadol's passing was the revelation that Marie had recently borrowed a significant sum of money from the deceased woman. Somewhat strangely, Marie then went to live with Mrs. Dopania Castadol's husband, although at the same time, she was still seeing Mr. Lambert Becker. In July 1934, during a private conversation with a confidant, Marie made a startling claim, saying that she possessed a substance capable of causing someone to die without leaving a trace. She apparently said that an autopsy would show a natural demise. This eerie revelation took a sinister turn when Marie prepared tea for Mrs. Dopania Castadol's widowed husband, which caused him severe illness, though mercifully he survived. However, he instructed Marie to leave his house. She befriended a gentleman named Mr. Goucher and hoped that he would buy her sewing business. But when he decided against it, the gentleman became very sick. Following an afternoon of tea and cake with Marie, he recovered from his ordeal, but severed all contact with Mrs. Becker. Her relationship with Mr. Lambert Becker was now faltering, and on the 2nd of November 1934, Mr. Lambert Becker died, succumbing to the effects of herbal teas administered by Marie. In a macabre twist, the gentleman's will revealed a substantial amount of money left to Marie, which she promptly directed towards her clothing shop and her extravagant lifestyle. However, Marie's so-called friends continued to get sick. On the 20th of March 1935, while staying with one named Julie Bosey, a sudden illness befell the lady. Initially thought to be indigestion, Marie swiftly prepared tea in an attempt to soothe her friend's discomforts. However, despite these efforts, Mrs. Bosey died shortly after. The pattern of unfortunate events persisted in the months that followed. On the 1st of May, Marie made a visit to see a lady named Catherine Becken-Parot, which ended in tragedy after she offered wine to her hostess, which resulted in the lady's sudden passing. It seemed that death would follow Marie Alexandrine Becker, yet not all the women who had encounters with her died. A lady named Mrs. Boulet, though gravely ill after drinking a glass of wine poured by Marie, managed to survive. The month of May bore witness to further sorrow when Miss Eileen Louise Damont died following drinking tea served by Mrs. Becker. With each death, suspicion deepened, yet Marie remained unfazed, her facade of innocence masking a chilling reality. There were more illnesses and misfortunes that surrounded Marie. Her friend Mrs. Flor fell seriously ill after drinking tea that Marie had prepared, but thankfully she recovered. However, not so fortunate was 67-year-old Mrs. Remacle, who was apparently being looked after by Marie when she suddenly died. She left behind a will, naming Mrs. Becker as her sole beneficiary. As the year progressed, suspicion surrounding Marie intensified when another woman died whilst under her care. Her name was Mrs. Yvard Krul, and she was only 55 years old. However, despite a thorough investigation by police into these deaths, there was a lack of evidence to link Mrs. Becker with them. Eventually, the investigation closed, and any possible case against Marie was dismissed. Undeterred by scrutiny, Marie continued her deadly routine, claiming 2 more victims, Mrs. Stevart and Mrs. Wilhelmsboot. Both deaths were shrouded in mystery. Mrs. Stevart left 25,000 Belgian francs to Marie, and there were reports that valuable items had gone missing from the home of Mrs. Wilhelmsboot. Following the initial investigation into Marie, the police did not look into any subsequent deaths of any of the women. However, whispers of her illicit activities persisted. On the 26th of September, Mrs. Florence van Lanka, a lady aged 85, passed away under similar suspicious circumstances. Just 2 weeks later, another lady who was under the care of Marie, named Mrs. Luxem Weiss, also died. However, following this, an anonymous letter reached the Liège Public Prosecutor's Office, which made officers wonder how it was possible that so many people had died, whilst in the company of Mrs. Becker. They decided to conduct another investigation. Officers were dispatched to speak to Marie, so on the 12th of October, while she was walking towards the house of a lady named Mrs. Lamy, they stopped her, their presence a sudden interruption into her plans. Officers then made a thorough inspection of her belongings, which unearthed a disturbing find. In her handbag, a substantial quantity of digitalis, a drug that is made from the leaf of a wild foxglove. Marie made a feeble attempt to justify the presence of this lethal substance as medication for a non-existent heart ailment, but this quickly crumbled, and it became evident that she had been on the brink of executing her sinister plan for the 17th time. As the investigation unfolded, the dark truth emerged. Marie's home was searched, and it soon became a scene of scrutiny, revealing much incriminating evidence, jewellery, clothing, and assorted belongings from the deceased victims. With each revelation, the scope of her atrocities became increasingly more chilling, painting a portrait of calculated malice, concealed behind a facade of innocence. Marie Becker was arrested and charged with murder. The trial of Marie Alexandrine Becker began on the 7th of June 1938 in the Palais de Justice, an elegant 16th century building in the heart of Liège. It had taken authorities 18 months to prepare the case against her. However, the trial started with such intensity that the judge deemed it necessary to call a day of recess. This provided a much-needed reprieve for all involved. The proceedings were nothing short of extraordinary, with the press and the public seemingly fascinated by the case. Following her arrest, Marie had undergone an examination by 2 physicians, one whose name was Dr. de Bloch, and who was a specialist in mental illness. In his testimony to the courts, he unequivocally stated that in his opinion, Marie was not afflicted by madness or instability, rather her actions were calculated and deliberate. More than 300 witnesses were summoned to testify in court. Some recounted how Mrs. Becker had attended the funerals of her victims, putting on a theatrical display of grief. They described how she knelt by the gravesides, shedding tears, only later to be spotted engaging in provocative dances at Liège nightclubs and extravagantly spending the money she had been left by innocent people who had died whilst in her care. The police alleged that Marie had committed the crimes with the motive of securing a legacy from her victims' estates, pointing out that 5 of the deceased were widows. It was stated that when Marie was first interviewed by police, she calmly told officers, "Well, you can cut them up into little pieces, and you can conduct post-mortem examinations, but you won't find anything." Throughout the trial, Marie vehemently maintained her innocence, and when questioned, she said that every witness had fabricated their testimonies. In response, the judge, whose demeanour was now apparently steeped in frustration, asked her, "Are we to believe that everyone in this case except yourself is lying?" On the 8th of July 1938, Marie Becker, who had been dubbed the Black Widow by the press, faced judgment. She was convicted of 11 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, and was also found guilty of theft and forgery. She had committed these terrible acts on trusting and vulnerable people who had considered her to be a friend. She was sentenced to death by guillotine, but as had been the practice in Belgium since 1863, her sentence was then commuted to life imprisonment. Upon hearing the sentence, Marie began to weep uncontrollably. The judge then turned to her and said, "Give yourself over to remorse and try to atone for your crimes." People continued to talk about the case and questioned as to why Marie had not been apprehended sooner. Many wondered whether her consistent methods, befriending vulnerable men and women, and apparently taking care of them when they were ill, had shielded her from suspicion. When trying to understand her motives, it was thought that she had been driven by greed, financial issues, and was consumed by selfish desires of a lavish lifestyle, which she believed she deserved. All of this had resulted in the tragic demise of her unsuspecting victims. Marie Becker was taken to the forest prison near Brussels. However, she only served 4 years of her sentence, as she died on the 11th of June 1942, a month short of her 63rd birthday. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next Brief Case